evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brianna Ben-Aaron, Director of Atid at Sinai Temple. We are grateful and excited that over 200 of you are spending your Wednesday evening with us. A huge thank you to Rabbi David Wolpe and Logan Ury, and to Andrea Stern, who helped make tonight possible. There is clearly a tremendous hunger among us Jewish young adults to talk about relationships, as you saw in the Slido a few minutes ago. And I hope tonight leaves you feeling seen, informed, and optimistic. Throughout the evening, we encourage you to please submit your questions through the chat. We will try to get to as many as possible during the Q&A. We're also looking forward to continuing the conversation immediately following this in a more intimate setting with Logan and those of you who have purchased her book. If you decide during this conversation that you would like to join after hours, great, we would love to have you. You can use the link in the chat to purchase How to Not Die Alone and receive an email with the link to join us in our new Zoom room at 7:40. Another way to connect post this event is at our first back in person Friday Night Live on June 11th at Sinai Temple. Make sure you're subscribed to our Atid emails, the link is also in the chat, to register and to receive more information about our future events. Additionally, if you're looking to become a member of our community, consider joining Sinai Temple at our reduced young professional membership rate. So if you needed a push, this is your push. Please email me or the Director of Membership, Jordan Friedman, and we will be happy to meet you and help you through the process. And now, for the main reason we're here tonight, I am thrilled to introduce our speakers. Logan Ury is a behavioral scientist turned dating coach and author of the book, How to Not Die Alone. As the Director of Relationship Science at the dating app Hinge, Logan leads a research team dedicated to helping people find love. In addition to graduating from Harvard and working for Google, Logan was a TED resident and featured speaker at South by Southwest. On a personal note, Logan is from Boca Raton, Florida, and attended Jewish day school and Jewish summer camp. Logan lives in the Bay Area with her husband, Scott. Rabbi David Wolpe is the Max Webb Senior Rabbi of Sinai Temple. Named most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek and one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post, Rabbi Wolpe has officiated numerous weddings, including my own, and published many articles about love and relationships, including one for Time magazine titled, "We Are Defining Love the Wrong Way." So without further ado, Logan Ury and Rabbi David Wolpe.
Thank you so much, Brianna. And Logan, it's really a joy to speak to you. And I'm going to get to the questions right away because I know that we won't, in an hour, we won't begin to exhaust. First of all, what's in the book, which I strongly recommend everyone here to get a copy of and to read, but also the topic even beyond the book. And I want to start off, I told you I was going to start off with this question. It says, how to not die alone. Now, the choice of the not interested me because it could have been how not to die alone, how to not die alone, how to die not alone. So I'm just curious why the not went after the two. And you decided to split the infinitive to die.
It's true. Yeah. So the first thing is just, I really like the idea of how to. I like the category of, I wanted to present the idea to people that this was something really practical. This was something that you could buy and understand. I'm on one path and I want to go on a different path, and this will tell you how to do it. So I was very focused on how to, but I have to tell you, my publisher fought me on breaking the infinitive. Sometimes I get emails from people that are like, I would buy your book, but I just can't handle the title. And I'm like, that's the reason why you're single, is because you can't get over things like that.
It's just like in Star Trek for years, How to Boldly Go Where No Man Has Gone Before. And people used to give them all sorts of grief about breaking up to go. But actually, what you just said leads me to the first question and observation, which is reading your book confirms something that I have long believed that I'd like you to address. And that is people treat falling in love like it's not a skill you can learn. Like everything else in life is a skill you can learn, but somehow falling in love is this magic thing that's supposed to happen by itself. But you actually, neither do you believe that, nor do you write the book that way. You write the book in order to help people learn the skill of choosing and falling in love. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a perfect summary of it. And so I start the book by saying, we feel like we shouldn't have to buy a book on love. Love is this natural thing. You fall into love. You don't think your way into it. But while love is a natural, organic thing that happens, finding a partner and deciding how to commit to them for the rest of your life, that's not natural. That's not something that we're born knowing how to do. And so the whole idea here is that dating and relationships are a skill. And there's something that we can get better at. And I hope that this is really empowering for people, because if you've been dating for a while and it hasn't worked out, there's nothing wrong with you. You are not doomed to be alone. You can make different choices along the way and wind up with a different result.
Okay, so that leads me to two questions I want to ask. The first is, I have found this tendency, and I'm sure you have, people will come to you and they will say, everything is wrong. I'm doing everything wrong. I've spent years looking for someone, I haven't. And then sometimes the next day they find someone and their entire outlook changes. And so it's clear that when we don't find the person, we overblame ourselves. When we find the person, sometimes we overcredit ourselves. Why don't we have a more balanced, systematic view of how to find someone and fall in love?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating question. And what comes to mind for me is my background is in behavioral science. So the study of how people make decisions. And we're really irrational. I'm sure many people here have heard of Dan Ariely and his work. And the whole idea there is that we often act in ways that are not in our own best interest. So we say we want to lose weight, and then we go to a buffet and we fill our plates as if we'll never eat again. Or we say we want to save for retirement, and then we seem to always be spending but not saving. And so the same thing can happen in love, where we say, I'm going to stop chasing after people who aren't interested in me, but we just keep repeating the same patterns over and over again. And so I'd say we are irrational in many areas of life, and probably nowhere more than in matters of the heart.
And one of the ways that you help us become more rational is through the combination of self-knowledge and other knowledge. And I think that self-knowledge in particular, and also the categories that you use, which I want you to talk about, which helps people understand not everything necessarily about themselves, but at least their dating behavior, is really important. Because I mean, the three categories that you give about romanticizer, maximizer, hesitator, I think everybody can find themselves in one, or sometimes in all three at different times. But would you explain how you came up with categories?
Absolutely. First of all, I have to say, I love a good quiz. I love a good framework. So I'm very glad that I got to include one in my book. I think it's really helpful when people have terms to describe what's going on for them, because not only are they able to identify with something and learn from it, but they also say, well, clearly it's not just me. And that's one of my big goals in the book. And one of my big goals tonight is for anyone who's listening and says, I feel really bummed. I feel like I lost a year of dating. I feel like I'm never going to find my person. A lot of people are feeling that way. And many of those people who felt that way in the past are able to overcome it. And so the framework is called the 3 dating tendencies. And I developed this in my work as a dating coach. And I found that I was working with a lot of different people, but they all seem to suffer from dating blind spots. And so these are patterns of behavior or ways of thinking that hold them back from finding love, but that they couldn't identify on their own. And so what each of them have in common is unrealistic expectations. And so the first one is the romanticizer, and they have unrealistic expectations of relationships. They love love, they want the rom-com, they want the meet cute. And the issue with the romanticizer is that they think, once I meet my soulmate, it's going to be effortless, it's going to be easy. And so when a relationship hits its inevitable rough spot, then they say, it must not be my person. If it were, it would be effortless. The second type is the maximizer, and their unrealistic expectations are of their partners. And they think, could I be 5% happier with somebody else? Is there somebody better out there for me? And they're always wondering, is the grass greener somewhere else? So they have trouble committing because they don't want to decide too early in case somebody else better is out there. And the last type is the hesitator, and they have unrealistic expectations of themselves. This is the person who says, I'll be ready to date when I lose 10 pounds, or when I get a more impressive job title, when I move out of my bad apartment. And so they always feel like love is conditional and they're just not lovable yet. And these people had an especially hard time during the pandemic because that gave them yet another excuse to not date.
So we're getting into the realm that you specialize in, a sort of choice theory. And one of the points that you make here, which I think, even if we didn't know it before, certainly in the age of dating apps, we know, is that more choice does not necessarily lead either to better choice or to more happiness. That if you have 100 laundry detergents, it's worse in some way than if you have 5 laundry detergents. And you actually give an example in the book. It isn't a laundry detergent, but of that idea. So are dating apps in some ways like deeply counterproductive? And should we design them to give more limited choices, or should we somehow limit our own choices? And how do we do that?
Yeah. So the first thing, we talked about this at the beginning, is dating is a skill. People are not born knowing how to choose a long-term partner. And the same thing is true when you think about in the span of human history, how did people get together, right? Maybe your parcel of land was next to my parcel of land, so our fathers negotiated, or my father gave your father 12 camels, right? There was a lot of matchmakers involved, families involved. People did not decide for it on their own. And so the fact that we are now choosing from hundreds or even thousands of people, that's very overwhelming for our brains. And we're not necessarily set up to make those decisions. And as you said, there's something called the paradox of choice. We think we want choice, but choice can often overwhelm us and lead us to make no decision at all, or to feel depressed and anxious about the decision we made. I should mention, I work for a dating app, I work for Hinge. And so I've decided that that's a place where I want to invest my time, because dating apps are the biggest way that people meet right now, especially during the pandemic. Around 2017, they became the most common way for successful couples to meet. And so what I do in my work at Hinge is try to say, we know about the paradox of choice. How can we actually limit it? How can we make it so that you're going slower, so that you're messaging fewer people, but that they're quality messages? And so I meet a lot of people where I say to them, I think you could go on 100 more dates this year and not find anyone you like, because it's not about meeting the right person. It's about your mindset. It's about how you're showing up. It's about your expectations. And so I think for a lot of people, they have to understand it's about going on fewer, better dates versus just trying to go on as many dates as possible.
And I want to ask you what is a difficult question, not difficult for you to answer, but difficult for some people to hear.
Yeah.
Is everybody who's out there actually looking for love?
I don't think so. I think some people are just looking to have fun. I mean, I've been thinking about this week. What's going to happen when the pandemic is over? There's going to be some people that are like, I was alone. I want to find a relationship. I'm very focused on partnerships. There's going to be other people who say, I haven't had physical touch in 14 months. I just want to go out and have some casual fun. And so I think different people are looking for different things. And that's one of the hardest challenges about dating right now, is if you're serious and looking for a relationship, how do you find out if the person is also looking for that?
I'm also asking that, I think that that's true. I'm also asking a longer term question, which is, are there people who in their lives don't think that love is their ultimate goal, that actually they're focused on other things and can be deceptive that way, because for someone who's looking for love, you assume that everybody else is looking for it too?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that question on a few levels. So one thing is that, right, I have this bold title for my book, How to Not Die Alone. And sometimes I unfortunately read the comments section on some of these posts, and people say, this is terrible. You can live a full life without finding a partner, and this is shaming single people. And when I hear that, I think I could write a book called how to create French cooking. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to learn to be a French cook, but if you want to learn how to do French cooking, buy this book. And so the same thing, everyone's looking for love.
If you want to die alone, you don't have to buy the book.
Go for it. I won't stand in your way. And so, there are all different movements when it comes to sort of romantic orientations, right? There's monogamy, there's polyamory, there's the asexuality community, there's the aromantic community. And so whether or not you put a label on it, I think that there are people who decide my life is about friendship, my life is about service, my life is about community. And so there are definitely people who aren't looking for love. But I should mention, since my book came out, I've been getting so many emails from people who say, I'm a 70-year-old widower and I just want to find someone, or I'm 50 years old and I've never been in a relationship. And so more than ever, I've been really blown away by the fact that many people are looking for love, and it's not something that you just grow out of or grow into. I think a lot of us just want to find that partner.
Now, I should say, even though we won't begin to be able to get to all of it, you have some things in here that are extremely practical that people generally do not know. And let me just say one statistic that I had no idea about, but that I think is incredibly helpful, is the 37% statistic.
Oh, yeah.
Would you, especially because I've hired assistants, and that's the example that you give.
Yeah.
Really helpful. Would you explain to people what you mean by that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so this is a concept from the book Algorithms to Live By. And the idea here is that there's a mathematical question that says, if you're hiring an administrator, what's the best way to do it? And so the scenario starts like this. You have 100 possible candidates, and you can only go through them one at a time. After each one, you say yes or no. And so what is the optimal place to stop and hire someone? If you decide too early, maybe all the good candidates come later on. If you decide too late, maybe all the good candidates have already passed. And so the mathematically correct answer is that you get to 37% of the candidates, in this case 37, and you say, who was the single best candidate in that first group of 37? That's now your meaningful benchmark. And the next time that you find someone who you like as more or better than that person who is the benchmark, you hire that person. And so you've gotten a sense of what's out there, but you don't wait too long. And so I include this in the book when I talk about the maximizer, because the maximizer is that person that's going to go through life and say, but wait, who else is there? And could she be more attractive? And could he be more ambitious? And so the idea is that if you think about the secretary problem with the amount of years that you're going to date, you might say, okay, I'm going to date from age 18 to 40. What is 37% of that? It's 26.1. So by the time I'm 26 years old, I've likely already dated somebody who's in that 37% and would be a meaningful benchmark. The next time I find someone I like as much or more than them, I'm going to commit to them. And people hear this and they get so stressed. They say, I'm way older than 26.1 years old. Are you saying I should have been with girlfriend from college? And no, the point is not to get back with your ex. It's that instead of wondering what else is out there, understand you've probably met someone who would be great, and that the next time you find someone like that, commit and build a relationship with them. Don't meet them and then continue to ask, who else could I be with?
So here's the fly in that ointment that I think we all deal with, that I would love some advice on, which is we all see examples every single day of people who are actually better than anyone you meet in real life. We see it on television, on Netflix, in movies, in music, so on. And so we don't only compare the people that we see to the people that we have actually met. We compare them to the models on Instagram or TikTok or wherever else. And you think, well, the person that I'm meeting isn't like that. So how do you recognize that that's not real, that you're comparing people to fantasies?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think you're really hitting the nail on the head when it comes to why are romanticizers the way they are. And so my theory is that romanticizers grew up watching rom-coms where it's all about the chase and the clumsy woman convinces the guy to be with her, or a lot of millennials who are around my age, we grew up in the Disney Renaissance, right? We grew up on Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid, and it's all about, love at first sight and these different things. And so we expect our lives to play out like that. And we really expect to meet the perfect person in the perfect situation. And it just works out a certain way. And we don't necessarily have these role models of real relationships. And there's a couple things going on. I mean, first of all, we know intellectually that Instagram is just a projection of our best moments, but that's not how our brain interprets it. Our brain sees a picture and says, that must be reality. Everyone else has found someone. I'm the last single person on earth. Everyone else is happy. And this is one of the sad things about how isolated we are these days, is that instead of living in villages where you hear people fight and you hear people make up, and you're exposed to the highs and lows of life, you only interact with people digitally and you assume their lives are this perfect thing that they're projecting. And I think it makes a lot of us feel more anxious, more depressed, more envious than we would if we actually saw all the colors of everyone's lives.
So how did you do it?
How did I find love?
Yeah.
It's a great question. So I was working at Google and I was thinking about irrational behavior. And at the time I was single and I was going on Tinder. I remember the first night I had Tinder, I swiped for 6 hours and I just couldn't believe it. Look at all these guys that I could go through. And it was like this game. And I remember even, you've read the book, so you know this part. I even remember that one day I was on the shuttle coming home from Google and I swiped left on my now husband because I was like, oh, he kind of looks like a bro. He's not smiling. He doesn't seem fun. And I just said no to him. And at the time I was chasing after all these guys that were fun and hot and, mysterious, but were not necessarily kind or reliable or even interested. And so one guy in particular in the book, I call him Burning Man Brian, this guy that I really developed feelings for at Burning Man and thought that we'd go back to San Francisco and turn it into a relationship. And it just didn't work out. And I ended up feeling so bad about it that I went to a dating coach and I was like, this isn't working. I'm sick of feeling this way. And so she helped me understand, how do I want a guy to make me feel? And I said, desired, confident, secure, appreciated. And how did Burning Man Brian make me feel? Anxious, depressed, insecure. And then she said, do you have anyone in your life who makes you feel that way? And it turns out that this guy at work, this guy named Scott, who I had met in college and then met again at Google and who was tutoring me in the statistics programming language, he made me feel that way. And he made me feel confident. And we laughed. And I loved when he tutored me. And I realized that I had written him off when I saw him on Tinder and when he told me he didn't like Burning Man and he didn't like travel. And then I was like, all right, there's something here. And I slowly worked towards turning that friendship into something more. And now we're married and we've been together for 6 years. And I feel like I was really able to overcome this idea of love is the chase, love is the challenge, love is convincing somebody to be with you, as opposed to what I have with Scott, which is you choose somebody and they choose you back, and then you build a relationship together.
This, by the way, is profoundly Jewish, right? The idea clearly in Jewish marriage, the idea is actually not the romantic chase. It is libnot bayit b'Yisrael, to build a house in Israel. The idea being that actually this is long-term, it's work, you do it together, you're building something. And when you build something, there are going to be mistakes and the hammer's going to hit your thumb and it's not always going to be easy. But that's part of the point. The point is that this is a generational project. And so one of the questions that was put in the chat that I think is a really interesting one is, how does your advice differ for men and for women? First of all, in terms of the 37%, are there like specific factors like a biological clock or someone being unkind that resets the 37%? But also, do you give, when people come to you as a dating coach, do you see men and women differently?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think, there's a couple ways that I can take it. And one is I didn't even realize how not gendered my book was until I started doing some interviews and podcasts about it. And I heard from a lot of young men, oh, we like your book because you don't say, women, you should play this game. Women, don't sleep with him until the third date. And I don't really believe in these gendered rules. I think that at the core of my book, I'm actually saying a very basic thing, which is have integrity, choose someone integrity, focus on the long term, and focus on somebody who you can really grow and develop and can be your teammate. And that is not gendered at all. That is really, what does a deep life look like, and how can you choose the right person and have them choose you? And so I'm actually really proud of that I think that this book is really beyond the idea of men only want something that they can't have, or women really want someone who can provide resources. That's just not my frame. But of course, there are some differences. And one place where I do talk about this in the book is when it comes to, for people who want to have biological children who they give birth to. Yes, of course, men and women have different fertility timelines. And so, for example, I say in the book, the month that I turned 31, I froze embryos with Scott. And we weren't even engaged at the time, but that almost felt like a bigger commitment than an engagement ring. And that was just me being like, you work at Google, it's part of the insurance plan. I'm not going to say no to free egg freezing. And I just thought about my future, and it felt like something that would give me more options. And so, yes, when women decide that they want to have biological kids that they give birth to, they do need to get a little bit more serious a little bit earlier. And men often do have the luxury of waiting longer. And so, yes, I think in the scheme of things, in that 37% question, the woman might say, I want to date from 18 to 30. So my 37% is way earlier. And a guy might say, I wanted from 18 to 45. My 37% is later. And so I think just realistically, the fertility question does create some limitations around when people make decisions.
Well, I think that what you made clear at the beginning of this question, which is true, is that this is actually not a book about how to date successfully, right? It's a book about how to find love and to build a lasting relationship, which is a different thing, where you can date very successfully and not find love and build a relationship.
Yeah.
And so part of my next question is whether and I don't know if this is only true of the romanticizer, but one of the things that I've seen over and over again in speaking to dissatisfied couples, or sometimes dissatisfied singles, is that they put too much on their partner. They want the other person to be their everything, and no one can be your everything. So it seems to me part of successful dating is having friends that are not your partner. Is that your experience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is actually a topic that's extremely close to my heart, and I'm happy to talk about this. And so the research, which I've been aware of for a number of years, is that the more people that a couple can go to for discrete needs. So for example, if I like exercising, but my partner doesn't, I have an exercise friend. If I like talking about politics, but my partner doesn't, I have a politics friend. The more that we call these other significant others, the stronger the partnership is, because I go to my partner for the roles they can and want to fulfill, but I don't expect them to be my everything. And having a community of people who support you and who play those roles is really significant and actually does have an impact on the couple's long-term happiness, success, even their sex life. And so the personal story that I can share is that this year I wrote an article in the Modern Love section of the New York Times called "We Needed More Significant Others." And the idea was that during the beginning of the pandemic, my then fiance, now husband, was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer. And we went through this very, very hard, isolating time where the world was shutting down and we were going through all this trauma, and we just didn't have our friends and family around. And after a number of months, we ended up actually moving into our friend's commune in Oakland. And now we live with 12 of our closest friends in this very interesting, kibbutz-like community. And it's certainly not what we expected to do when we were married or when we were in our 30s, but we needed people around us. We needed these OSOs, these other significant others. And what I talk about in that article is that I feel like they really were the reason that we've gotten through this time, because we didn't put so much pressure on each other and on the relationship. And we were able to truly lean on the community that we had cultivated for a decade.
for people who feel uncomfortable on a dating app, how do you suggest that they don't have a job where they meet people? What do you suggest that they do? Is there a way to meet people in the world?
Yeah,
Actually,
it's a great question. So the first thing I would say is that during the pandemic, the dating apps really have been the only safe and effective way to meet people. You're just not meeting somebody at your cousin's wedding. You're not meeting somebody at a bar. So a lot of people that were holdouts have tried it. And for people who just say, it's not romantic, I don't want to meet that way, I would say, who cares how you meet? The dating app is the modern matchmaker. It's just, I'm here and I'm single, you're here and you're single, we're going to get together. As soon as you open the door to your first date, it's as if you met any other way. And so I would really say, stop putting so much pressure on the we met story and just understand that it's a way to meet each other. But for people who are burned out on dating apps or just want to try something different, I have a number of suggestions for them. And so one of them is ask your friends to set you up more, send them a few pictures, say, looking for somebody with these qualities. Do you know anyone? I'll go out with anyone you recommend. Another thing, my friend's dad, of course, a Jewish dad, said, for anyone who sets Molly up with 5 dates, either 5 dates with the same guy or 5 dates with 5 different guys, I'll send you an order from nuts.com. And so he was really showing he was very serious about Molly finding somebody, and he created this incentive system. And then one more that I'll share is I have this framework in the book called the events decision matrix. And the idea here is that the best way to meet someone is at an event where you like the activity and you're likely to interact. And so you can actually plot it where it's, is there a high likelihood of interaction? So something like a dinner party versus a movie. Is this something I enjoy? So maybe, oops, sorry about that. So maybe something like, I really love bikes versus I don't like working out. And any activities that fall in that magic quadrant of high likelihood of interaction and high likelihood of enjoying myself, go to those events, because those are the events where you're going to shine and you're going to meet people who are interested in the same stuff as you. And that's really some of the best ways to break out of that dating app funk.
Now, we all know that the easiest way to break up with someone is just to never answer their texts and never speak to them again, right? I mean, when I was growing up, they didn't call it ghosting, but now they call it ghosting. But let's say you don't want to be a jerk. Let's say you actually want to be a human being. And yet you think this is not the right person, or you want to be a friend, or maybe you don't want to be a friend. You actually have some advice in the book about how to do this. But a lot of people would like to know, how do I humanely, easily, and definitively break up with someone I don't want to be with?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, because I do think ghosting is one of the hardest parts of modern dating. I hear heartbreaking stories about people who say, we really hit it off, and he was the first guy in so long I'd been interested in, and then he just totally ghosted me. And so we can all do our part to create a more empathetic ecosystem of daters. And the first thing to do with that is to really communicate with somebody what's going on. So as soon as you know you're not interested in somebody, let them know. If it's only been a date or two, you can send them a text and you can say, hey there, it's been really fun getting to know you. I just don't think we're a romantic match. You know, thanks for a great conversation. And you leave it like that. And it's kind and it's firm. If they say, why, what's wrong? Was it when I said this? You know what? Leave it alone. You don't owe them any feedback. You don't owe them more conversation, but you just owe them the clarity of explaining where you are. Because the biggest misconception around dating is, oh, I don't want to be harsh. I don't want to reject someone. That would hurt their feelings. But we know from the research at Hinge, 86% of people say, outright reject me. It hurts, but I would rather know. And people don't want to be ghosted. No question, right? Because ambiguity of bad news, ambiguity is much worse than bad news, because with bad news, you can move on. With ambiguity, you're always wondering, is today the day she's going to text? Will I hear from her now? And it just hurts even more.
So, and one of the things that you say in the book that is one of the many things that you say that is very smart and very true is that sometimes when people break up, they stay in touch because they want to keep their options open. Not really because but they just don't want to let go of something that might be possible. how do we be better than that?
Yeah. This is one of the pieces of research in the book that's probably changed my life the most in terms of what I learned and then how I live. And so this goes back to what we were talking about with the paradox of choice. We think we want a lot of choice, but in reality, choice makes us feel depressed or anxious or unsure. And this is a similar concept. We think we want reversible decisions. We want to buy the jacket that we can return. We want to reply maybe to the Facebook event, or maybe even the Temple Sinai event.
Right.
We always want our opportunity to change our mind. And so that's what we're doing when we keep the door open with the ex. We're saying, well, if I don't meet somebody better, I'm going to keep them around and maybe I'll go back to them. But this actually slows us down, because when you make an irreversible decision, your brain takes over and it rationalizes it. It says, that wasn't the right person for me. I learned the lessons, but I'm going to move on. When you keep your options open, you're always doing that pro-con list. And so the advice is that you should close the door, stop talking to your ex, and that really creates the space for you to say, what do I really want? And how can I move forward instead of looking backwards?
To put it in Talmudic terms, the rabbis say, make your yes, yes, and your no, no.
I love that. I'm going to use that moving forward.
Yeah, please, by all means.
Yes.
And that does, and it certainly accords with what we know about. It's hard to do, but once you do it, any decision in some ways is better than constant indecision and racking yourself about, I could have done this, I should have done that. So what about the reality that you might fall in love with someone who doesn't have the same life goals as you? What if you want a child and the other person doesn't, but that's the person you love? Like, how do you, there's no single or simple answer to this, but nonetheless, how do you weigh the different things that you want in your life?
Yeah. This makes me think of a story where I was at a networking event and this woman said to me, I'm 35, I'm single, I'm looking for love. I will date any guy as long as he's not a mouth breather. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like, I even had to remind myself what a mouth breather was, but it was kind of a shtick and she was being funny, but it was something that she believed. And what she was doing wrong was she was confusing a deal breaker, something that would actually get in the way of defining and developing the relationship you want, with what I call a PPP, a permissible pet peeve. Maybe she doesn't like mouth breathers, but that's not a deal breaker. Deal breakers are things like, I want children and you don't. I want to raise my children in the Jewish faith and you don't. I want to move back to Germany and you don't, whatever it is. And so it's really important for couples, especially early on when they're in the throes of love. And we know from brain science that love is a drug and people are addicted to the feeling of the other person. And so when you're so wrapped up in that, you might just convince yourself, this is my person. Of course, we'll build the exact same life. Of course, we want the same things. But no, that's why it's so important to sit down and have those conversations about things like children, religion, finances. Am I going to work? Are you going to work? What's our relationship to gender roles and things like that? And so that's why in the book, I give people a series of questions of what to ask each other before you decide to get married. Because from speaking to divorce lawyers, they say one of the biggest things that happens is that people assume that they're on the same page about stuff. They don't have those critical conversations. They don't get to meet with the rabbi. And then they wind up in a relationship where they are fundamentally not aligned.
So I'm synthesizing a bunch of the questions that have been asked, but one of the things that you also write about in the book that's important is that sometimes you don't feel that spark. And yet that doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is doomed. So can you say a word about that, about work, almost like about working towards the spark?
Yes. It's so interesting. Like when you write a book, it's a very solo thing. And then you release it out into the world and certain concepts take off. And probably the 3 dating tendencies and this idea of ditching the spark have been the ones that have resonated the most. And so the idea here is that I talk to people after dates and they say, Logan, he was great. We had so much fun, good conversation. I'm never going to see him again. I say, what are you talking about? And they say, I just didn't feel the spark. And so the spark has become this all-encompassing word that means instant connection, fireworks, instant butterflies. And I think this is part of the rom-com problem, is that we expect this love at first sight, but there's actually three main myths around the spark. And so the first one is that if you don't feel the spark, it will never grow. And that's just not true. Only 11% of people say that they have love at first sight. And the truth is that lots of people like each other more over time. The more you're exposed to somebody, the more they grow on you, right? That's what happened with Scott. I had known him for 8 years before we started dating. The second myth is that if you feel the spark, it must be a good thing. Well, that's also not true. Some people are just really sparky. They give the spark to everyone. They're very charismatic. They're very attractive. Maybe they're very narcissistic. And so you think, oh, something special is developing between the two of us. But no, they give that feeling to everyone. It might even be a bad sign. It might be a sign of anxiety. And the last thing is that if we have the spark, it must be a viable relationship. And that's also a myth, because lots of divorced couples once felt the spark, and the spark is just not enough to sustain a relationship. And the antidote to this is to go for the slow burn, the person who gets better over time, the person who may be a little clumsy and may not be the most charming, but they're a mensch. They'll hold your hand during the hard times. They're loyal, they're kind. And so we really need to train our brains from go after the spark to go after the slow burn.
One of the questions that we got a couple of different times in different ways is, do you give different advice or think differently about somebody who's older, someone who's been married for 15 years and then is going back into the dating pool, or somebody who's in their 50s or 60s and wants to find someone again? Is it different from giving advice to millennials?
You know, this is something that I'm still sort of figuring out for myself. So really, in my dating coaching, it's exclusively with people in their 20s and 30s. That's who I've worked with. Hinge, majority of people are young to old millennials, kind of in that range. We definitely have people up to 70s.
I just want to say that I know someone very well who, the woman is about in her mid 50s, the man is in his early 60s, hadn't found anyone for the longest time, and just met on Hinge and are like deliriously happy. So I just want you to know.
That makes me so happy. Oh, they should.
You have all
I
the
love that. Yeah,
stories too.
We do a weekly success stories reading at our meeting, so they submit that. But you know, so this is the group that I'm familiar with, and I am getting a lot of questions saying, I want you to do more research on my age group. And so I think a lot of the lessons apply, but realistically, if you're getting married for the first time and you're making decisions about building a life together and having children, that's going to be different than if you meet later in life and the children question isn't as important. Maybe the religion question might become less important if you're not bringing kids into the world. And so I'd say a lot of these things are universal. Things like you want to be authentic, you want to communicate your interests, you want to put daily effort into relationships, but other things about what matters and what kind of life you build, I imagine that those do change over time.
And how do you get your friends to make introductions? Because you say to people, oh, if you know anyone, introduce me, but that doesn't seem to work for a lot of people. So is there specific things you can say to them to encourage them to do it?
Yeah, I thank you for this question. I have this op-ed that I've been wanting to write called "We Should All Be Matchmakers." That's basically like, look, if you're in a relationship and you're happy, you could be empowering your friends. We should all be introducing every great person to everyone that we know. And so I have a series of steps in the book, and I'll try to remember them as best as possible. But the first thing,
if you forget them, everybody who's listening is going to buy the book, so it's all right. Not a problem.
I love the rabbinical endorsement. Yeah.
That's right, exactly. There it is.
The first thing to do is to really lower friction, make it easy for your friends and say, here's a few flattering but accurate photos of me. You can tell them Logan is this many years old. She likes these activities. She's looking for someone like this. Can you literally just copy and paste this to different people that you know? And so you really make it easy for them. You do the work for them. And then if they write back and say, oh, I don't know any single people. You say, well, does anyone you work with know any single people? Does your younger brother know any single people? And you force them to be more creative. Sometimes you can say things like, I tend to really like women who are artistic or who are musicians or creative writers. I tend to get along well with people like that. And then maybe it'll spark an idea in their head of someone like that. And so first thing you do is you make it easy for them to do the introductions. The second thing is, if they send you somebody, say yes. Because if somebody sends you an introduction and you say no, they're not going to send you somebody again. They're not going to go out on a limb for you. And then the third thing is that after the date, give them some feedback. You know, you can say, he was very kind, but I don't think we're on the same page about what we're looking for or this and that. And so I think really leaning on your friends and saying, my goal in 2021 is to find someone. I'm so happy for you that you have a relationship. I would love if you could help me find my person, and you share the burden of finding love. And I think it's a really great way to support all of our single friends.
How important is physical attraction?
You know, it's an interesting question. I feel like there are people that are experts on sex and desire and physical attraction, and that is not exactly my field. I'm more focused on sort of the decision making of dating, but of course, physical attraction matters. Of course, you want to be excited about being with the person. But what I will say, I know from the research, is that physical attraction tends to matter less than we think it does, because the truth is that attraction fades over time. So much of what we're attracted to is novelty. And this is sort of a crass joke, but there's this joke, you know, behind every hot person is a person who's sick of having sex with them. And sort of the idea here is that a lot of attraction and lust is about being with a new person. And so if you overly optimize for somebody who's very physically attractive and you sort of spend your coins on that versus somebody who's kind or loyal or emotionally stable, that's not a great long-term plan. And so yes, you should be attracted to the person, but not at the cost of the things that are going to be consistent long-term.
So I don't want to get you in any hot water, but do you find in general, and you can avoid this question if you want, do you find in general that the advice that you give, which requires a certain maturity and thoughtfulness, I think, to take, is received better by women than by men? That men have a harder time integrating this?
You know, this is actually touching on something that I feel really proud about, which is women buy way more self-help books. Women are much more likely to go to a relationship workshop or talk to their friends about it. But for the entire time I've been a dating coach, 50% or more of my clients are men. And that's because I use words like sunk cost fallacy, status quo bias, loss aversion. And everything I'm doing is genuinely couched in research, but it also makes men feel safe because they're like, she's not some woo-woo love guru that's talking about chakras. I'm actually describing it in terms that feel real to them. And so what I've found is that men have the same questions as women. Men struggle with many of the same things, but they don't necessarily have friends or family that they can talk to. And so I actually feel really proud that I work with so many men, because I'm sometimes the only person that they're talking to about this stuff. And that, you know, even I have my book here. It's when I was designing the cover of the book, I said, it has to pass the subway test. I want a guy to be able to read this on the subway and for it to not be hot pink with stiletto heels on it, because this book is for men and women, and it's not just how to get the guy.
And I think actually the point that you were making along the way, I want to highlight, which is that it's sometimes a vocabulary question. It's how you express what you say. And when you said you talk about sunk cost, now you're speaking a language that I understand. And so I can talk those terms without feeling, as you said, embarrassed or self-conscious or whatever. I think that's a really important point. Okay, so tachlis, as we say, very like down to earth, practical advice. You go out on a date, you remember, okay, I'm not going to entirely base myself on the spark that I feel for this person. What am I looking for? Like, what few things should I check when I'm on this date and think about later when I go back over in my mind to see whether this person's right for me?
Yeah. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see people doing in modern dating is they treat the date like a job interview. We sit across from each other. I ask you where you went to school. Where do you live in the city? What is your job? How many siblings do you have? And it's this exchange of information. It's this exchange of resume qualities. And I'm not having fun. You're not having fun. And I'm in evaluator mode. And what functions way better for connection is to be in the experiential mode. So how can you play together? How can you have an experience? Can we go to a park and run around until we pet 5 dogs? Can we go on a taco tour of Mission Street in San Francisco? How can we play? How can we have fun? And so it's much more about tuning into yourself and saying, not is good enough for me, not does he check all the boxes, but how do I feel around him? Do I feel curious? Does he make me feel desired? Is there more I want to learn about him? And really focusing on the side of you that the person brings out versus do they check all the boxes?
I do want to say that in the chat, it's the last call to join the after hours and enter to win a private coaching session with you. So if you're not on the chat, you should get on the chat and take a look at that link that Brianna has offered. And also you have in the book, like a sort of self-evaluation quiz for people to get to know themselves. One of the things that I wonder if, I'm not on dating apps, so I have no idea if any dating apps have this, but do any dating apps have, or could you design something like that? That is, before you do this, evaluate yourself and understand who you are. Because self-knowledge would be is so integral to finding someone else.
It's definitely something that we're thinking about at Hinge. I mean, if you think about why did Hinge hire me, their point is basically, we believe dating is a skill. You can teach people how to do it. And so my whole job is to research people who are using Hinge to find love. What are they doing? And how can I teach other people how to do that? And this self-knowledge is really a big part of it. And one silver lining of the pandemic that I've just been so happy to see is that many people spent the early months of the pandemic going inwards and saying, I want to break my bad dating habits. I want to develop healthier ones. I want to prioritize relationships more. And so we're really seeing this rise of intentional dating where people are being more serious about who am I, what kind of person do I want to have, and what kind of relationship do I want to build. And so as the pandemic eases, I really hope that people are going to be entering into the dating world with a newfound self-knowledge and a motivation to find someone, and that's going to lead to a lot of relationships.
Well, I think that, I mean, as we're coming towards the end, I think that it's clear that the more people start to think about this as something that you actually can learn how to do, as opposed to something that is supposed to happen to you, which is how thoughtful people approach everything else in their lives. I mean, they learn how to invest and they learn how to ski, and yet they don't learn, right, how to evaluate themselves and others when it comes to love. I think that that's the rise sort of behavioral science as regards to love. This could only be a good thing. Do you ever feel like it takes some of the mystery out of it, or is that a concern?
People ask me this and they say, you're trying to turn us into an AI robot. You're trying to turn us into rational beings. You're taking all of the spontaneity out of love. But I say, what is more romantic than getting out of your own way, finding your person, and building the relationship of your dreams? It's not about turning you into a robot with an algorithm. It's about saying, you've been doing the same thing over and over again. It's repeating the same bad patterns. What if you try something different? What if you date like a scientist and you actually get different results? And so I think it's much more about the outcome, which is finally getting that relationship that you've been looking for. And what could be more romantic than that?
So I'm going to summarize what you said for you, and you'll tell me if it's okay. You can absolutely say, no, I don't mean that. But my sense of what you're saying is, it is more romantic to create something than it is to find something.
Yeah, and that great relationships are built, they're not discovered.
Right. So fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm very
the time
grateful.
flew by. It was
I
so
know.
fun.
Once again, I just want to let people know, I don't know if Brianna's coming back on, but how to not die alone. I think, oh, there you are, Brianna. Hi there. It's a really wonderful book to learn how to find love. And I hope that if you have not found love, you will read it and find love.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Logan. And thank you, Rabbi Wolpe, for such an informative conversation tonight. Just saying, if you plot Friday Night Live, like Logan explained, I bet it would be an event where you would shine. Just saying.
Yeah.
June 11th. But for those joining after hours, we'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you so much. Bye.